Thank you for joining us for the Levesque Institute for Civic Engagement's Presidential Election Series to inform you, the voter, on issues critical to this year's presidential election. The intent of this series is to keep political views out of these sessions and present facts that will help you become informed through the lens of which candidate you feel will be the best to carry out our democratic principles. In these divisive and turbulent times before us, strong leadership is critical to uniting us both domestically and globally. Tonight's session will focus on 4 topics: student loans, climate change, foreign affairs, and criminal justice reform. I would like to thank Brittany DePietro, the Levesque Institute Program Manager, and Kara Oliver, the Director of Strategic Initiatives, for the deliberate, thoughtful planning of these events. Our format for tonight is 5 minutes of facts on each topic and 10 minutes of discussion or questions. Please post your questions in the chat box. I would like to thank our students who are involved tonight with these topics and presentations. Andrew Fleckenstein is a sophomore international studies major. Andrew eventually would like to work as a public servant in the United States government. Emily Broxup is a senior international business management and Spanish double major. She is graduating in May and hopes to pursue business consulting or work for community organizations in her future career. Jacob Tucker is a senior here at NU. He will be graduating in December with a degree in history and political science and a minor in law. Jacob grew up in Grand Island, New York, and after leaving NU, he's going to enter law school with the intention of pursuing a concentration in international human rights law. Nia Robinson is a junior political science major, and in the future, she wants to help make change. Again, thank you to the 4 students, and we'll start our first session, which will be student reform, and that'll be presented by Kara Oliver and Emily Broxup.
Okay, perfect. So thank you again, and thank you, Patty and Brittany and everyone for being here tonight. So the passage of the Ensuring Continued Access to Student Loans Act enabled private lenders to continue making federal loans despite the problems in capital markets. With the passage of the 2010 Healthcare and Education Reconciliation Act under the Obama administration, guaranteed loans were eliminated. The act mandated that all federal government student loans be obtained directly. Private lenders had to make their own loans without involvement of the federal government. This major policy shift allowed for an increased grant funding and the reduction of income-driven payments. These challenges constitute for the basis of the current system. The debate over the wisdom of the structure rages on, with federal and private loans standing as the second highest debt category of 2018. First is commercial debt and or credit card debt. The continued evolution of the student loan system is all but an uncertainty. So Emily found this great visual here to really show you the rising cost of student loans. Oh, pardon me for a second. Sorry, my dogs are playing. With the rise of private college and the rise of public college, again, Emily found this really good visual here. So as you can see, there's been a 400% increase since the 80s. So talk about inflation. Even accounting for, students at these universities have seen a 129% increase over the past 3 decades. So we're talking about 3 generations here. We're seeing this constant rise, and that's for private education. But even the cost of public education, those numbers are really staggering as well. So if you see here, public non-for-profit 4-year college students have tuition increased by 571%. So accounting for inflation, that price has gone up 213%. So student loan debt is at its highest in 2019. The latest student loan debt statistics for 2019 show how serious the debt loan crisis has become for borrowers across all demographics and age groups. Student loan debt, again, is now the second highest consumer debt category behind mortgage debt and higher than both credit cards and auto loans. So really think about that. Borrowers in the class of 2017 on average owe $28,650, according to the Institute for College Access and Success. there are 45 million borrowers who collectively owe more than $1.5 trillion in student loan debt in the United States. So just some more statistics here, and this comes from the U.S. Department of Education. Total student loan debt, again, 1.56 trillion. Total U.S. borrowers with student debt, 44.7 million. Student loan debt delinquency and or default rate at 11.4%, so that's 90 days or more delinquent when creditors start to see this. Public service loan forgiveness, cumulative borrowers, 890,516. Total dollar amount given, 12.3 million in student loan debt, student loan forgiveness. So if you look on the right side of the visual here, it breaks down the states that have some of the highest student loan debt balances in the billions, and then borrowers in the millions. At California, coming in at a staggering $111.7 billion. And New York coming in number 3 in our state, $73.5 billion. And this is just another visual to really show you what age demographic does this look like, right? So individuals under the age of 30 in 2017, if we're looking at the most recent statistics, and again, this is in the billions, $383.8 billion total in student loan debt. So this is the millennials, this cohort. This is really, really astounding. Okay, and these are just the sources, and now we are going to move into the student loan positions. So the issue, should student loan debt be forgiven? President Donald Trump, there were no resources found, so it's important to note that. Vice President Joe Biden, also his position, there were no resources or information found on either of the candidates' websites. Should public college be tuition free? Again, on President Trump's website, there is no information that is documented. For Vice President Joe Biden, yes, if you go on his website, they are bulleted and documented and broken down what his plan is for student loan forgiveness. Should Pell Grants be expanded? On President Donald Trump's website, yes, expand eligibility. And for Vice President Joe Biden's, yes, double the maximum value. And now Emily will go through the next slide.
Great. So before we talk about these points to consider, I just want to read some more facts about the candidates' stances on these issues. So presidential candidate Joe Biden plans to make public colleges and universities free for families with income below $125,000. He would like to double the maximum value of Pell Grants and ensure that dreamers are eligible for financial aid. He plans to cap the federal income-based repayment program at 5% of an individual's discretionary income. Biden plans to invest in community colleges and training to improve student success and grow a stronger, more inclusive middle class. He would like to redo the public service loan forgiveness program and allow recipients to receive $10,000 of loan assistance for every year of national or community service for up to 5 years. President Donald Trump plans to combat the student loan crisis by putting a limit on annual as well as lifetime student loans for graduate students and parent borrowers. Trump supports expansion of access to scholarship and grants. He has eliminated subsidized federal student loans and the public service loan forgiveness program from the proposed 2021 fiscal budget, decreasing the education budget by 7.8%. He has extended eligibility for Pell Grants to be year-round. Income-based payment plans would be 12.5% of discretionary income instead of the current 10 to 20% under his plan. And he also plans to reduce funding for federal work study by $630 million. Now we will look at some of our questions to help facilitate our discussion. Should the American student loan situation be considered a crisis? What are the implications of student loan debt? How does this affect a borrower's financial future? Do you think eliminating student debt will impact the economy negatively or positively? Should the government provide free higher education, and is it sustainable? Should borrowers have an annual and or a lifetime limit? So feel free to hop in and contribute. anyone have anything they want to share, answer to this question, or even just a thought of your own?
This is a very complicated issue because college tuition is set by a number of factors, one of which is whether it's a private school or public school. They've all had big inflationary increases. But what is it? Take an undergraduate, just talk about undergraduate students. What is the real cost to college for their education? What other things are being funded through tuition? I think that there really needs to be a presidential commission to examine why tuitions are the way they are in public and private schools. And I also think that states have to take some responsibility for what they want to do too. So this is a state issue. It used to be that public education in New York City was free. That is, public colleges were all free. Not anymore, but it's still, City University is still one of the less expensive places
That's
to
for
go.
students who aren't leaning toward teaching, they have no idea what they want to do. And quite often those students will take a couple courses with us just to try
You could
things
just
out.
go on mute
But
if
if
you're
you're
not
a
speaking.
bio major and you could still take an elective in education early on and put one foot over here and see if that might be something that you like. But we have students transferring from all.
Excuse us. Is there somebody? Okay.
Yeah, well, to that point, Warren, I think that is really important to look at, especially because even now the difference between a public and private education is substantial. But for some students, after certain aid and scholarship, private might even be more affordable than the public education. And so you do kind of wonder, what are you paying for here? Where might costs be able to be subsidized maybe by the government? Where can schools cut back? And even in the area, seeing other colleges that have had to lay off faculty recently because they can no longer afford to keep them on, it kind of begs the question, where is the money going? Anything else about the student
Warren?
loan crisis?
Excuse me, Emily. I think Warren's trying to talk and he doesn't realize he's on mute.
Still on mute.
Also, who is educating students and in what settings? A lot of the colleges still use this giant auditorium setting for required courses. And a lot of small courses are taught by adjunct faculty and by teaching assistants. No offense to teaching assistants or graduate assistants or even adjunct. I've done adjunct work on occasion, but the level of pay for adjunct, you'd be better off working at McDonald's. They're not, the tuition it covers a lot more than just faculty pay. It covers the whole infrastructure that supports the college, and should be that separated out. What should a student pay for, and what should be optional in terms of what you want?
Yeah, absolutely.
It definitely is all rolled into one.
Yeah.
That tuition, and then you have your room and board, you have your fees, but the overall package, the tuition definitely takes care of your infrastructure, your operations, your maintenance, all of those things. So it goes beyond just the word tuition.
It's not transparent in any way either.
Right.
And that's all colleges, not picking on any particular college. To some degree, some are more transparent, but it's sort of like a cultural tradition in higher education. They just don't do that. They don't feel like there's an incentive for them to do that.
Right. Right. If there isn't, let's see, we have one question in the chat box. I feel like the pandemic may influence a lot of this, especially since a lot of students are requesting a reduction in loans because they cannot or could not go to school because of COVID. Anyone like to comment on that?
I would tend to agree. And then in addition, you also have the dichotomy of I'm paying for online education when I'm paying the same rate for an in-person attendance, which is negatively impacting everyone as well.
Thank you, Jacob.
Also, graduates of schools, because they have such heavy debt, are not thinking career-oriented. They're thinking more in terms of getting a job, any job. And that's not what they went 4 years to college for, is to get any job. And so I think there's a lot of graduates of college are between a rock and a hard place. And there needs to be some reform in terms of what they have to pay and what can be forgiven.
Or at the very least, subsidization from the government just to provide relief from this that depressive desperation state where I'm forced to take any job even if I don't want to.
I mean, after all, we bail out the banks. Why shouldn't we bail out, especially those people who have limited income to begin with? You know,
Exactly.
a lot of them have debts beyond what they could pay off in 5 years.
If we don't have any more questions, I'm going to move us along to our next topic, which is going to be climate change.
Thank you. So we are going to talk about climate change now, which is a change in global or regional climate patterns, in particular, a change apparent from the mid to late 20th century onwards. So really tracking change from the 1950s to current times. And this is attributed largely to the increased levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide produced by the use of fossil fuels. So things like coal, petroleum, natural gas are in that fossil fuel group. Ways that we see climate changes occurring are through things such as warming trends, which is a period of time when the temperature increases in a particular region. As you can see by this image here, you can see how the Earth has warmed since the 1950s. Most of our current warming trends are likely because of human activity since the mid-20th century, and the probability of this is greater than 95%. So it's a very likely that human activity is causing this warming trend. And this trend is progressing at an unprecedented rate. Carbon emissions have also been going up pretty significantly since the 1950s. Carbon dioxide emissions are emissions stemming from the burning of those fossil fuels we discussed in the first piece of this, and the manufacturing of cement. It's released through natural processes like volcano eruptions and respiration, but also through human activities such as deforestation, land use changes, and the burning of the fossil fuels. Humans have increased atmospheric CO2 concentration by 47% since the Industrial Revolution began. And again, as you can see on this chart, the emissions have risen greatly since the 1950s. Glacial retreat is another way in which we're seeing climate change in the world. The Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets have decreased significantly in mass. Greenland has lost an average of 279 billion tons of ice per year since 1993, and then Antarctica has lost about 148 billion tons of ice per year as well. So you can see in this picture how drastically this glacier has changed since 1917, how much it's retreated. And this retreating is seen around the globe. So it's seen in Africa, the Alps, the Himalayas, all over the globe. It's not just one area of our Earth that the glaciers are retreating. Sea level is also rising. The average height of the ocean surface at a specific place measured over a certain period of time is the definition of the sea level. And our global sea level has risen about 8 inches in the last century. This is highly attributed to that glacial melting, where the water from the melting glaciers is increasing sea level through this climate change. And you can see in this chart, based on the greenhouse gas pathways, how extreme our sea level could rise if greenhouse gases remain very high. And again, greenhouse gases are the things that emit radiant energy that trap the heat in the Earth's atmosphere. So you can see if these gas pathways remain very high, sea level will rise very significantly. It's also important to talk a little bit about the Paris Climate Agreement, which the United States has currently removed itself from. The aim of the Paris Climate Agreement is to try to keep a global temperature rise this century well below 2 degrees Celsius. And they really want to limit the temperature increase even further to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So this is a collaborative effort among various countries throughout the world to really work together to decrease the impacts of climate change. And it also aims to strengthen the ability of countries to deal with the impacts that are already happening because of climate change and give them the tools to best address it. And with that, I will turn it over to Andrew to discuss the positions for climate change.
So, on the candidates' positions on the issue of should the U.S. rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement, President Donald Trump has stated that he will not, as he was the one who withdrew from the agreement to begin with. Vice President Joe Biden says that he will rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. With regard to should the U.S. expand its use of nuclear power, President Trump and Vice President Joe Biden have both stated that they would use nuclear power for an effective alternative to the current ones. On the issue of should the Keystone XL pipeline be built, President Donald Trump has said yes, while Vice President Joe Biden has said no. Should the U.S. adopt a climate change plan such as the Green New Deal, President Donald Trump has stated no, while Vice President Joe Biden has stated yes. Both candidates agree that fracking should be allowed. Should the U.S. expand fossil fuel extraction on public land, President Donald Trump's position is yes, while Vice President Joe Biden has stated no. We could not find information on President Trump's opinion on the U.S. enforcing a carbon tax, while Vice President Joe Biden has stated that he would. With regard to should the U.S. move toward 100% clean energy and net zero emissions, President Donald Trump's statement could not be found, and Vice President Joe Biden has stated yes, and in fact he seeks to make the U.S. 100% clean energy by 2050. Points to consider. Should we be worried that climate change may be irreversible soon? Are countries in the Paris Climate Agreement going to change the outcome of climate change? President Trump has withdrawn from the Paris Climate Agreement. How does this affect our future? Do you think recent changes in climate and weather are more attributed to natural or human causes? Do you feel humans are the main cause of climate change? And at this point, I'd like to open it up to discussion.
Hi, Tom here. For the first point of being irreversible, I believe that it is irreversible just because we've gone past a certain point. Like what happened in the 1950s and how much CO2 is being released into the atmosphere, that is what we're seeing now, the effects of it. So even when Joe Biden said he wants to make our country, or hopes to be at least, carbon neutral, carbon free, where it'll be a sustainable energy, we'll have that by 2050. Even if we get it done by then, the next like so many years after, 50, 60 years, we're going to be showing the effects from that. And when we were just talking about like if humans are the main cause of climate change, I believe that it's a lot more to than just like humans. It comes down to permafrost that's in the North Pole, because once that starts melting, there's nothing that can stop that from melting. And what's inside of the permafrost, I'm just really interested in this. It's trapped carbon dioxide. So as that's melting, it's releasing more CO2 into the atmosphere, and it's a constant repeated cycle of releasing CO2. So even if we did stop it, the permafrost is already melting, and I believe that there's no way that we can reverse what has happened. But as humans, we do a good job of adapting to the circumstances at hand. So that's my input.
Very great input, thank you. Anybody else have any comments?
I'll say one thing. Well, I think that humans are like the main cause of like climate change, mostly because like we live in an anthropocentric society where humans think they're the most important thing, like compared to the environment. Like they don't really care about what they do to the environment, especially like the government. Like we had organizations like the Earth Liberation Front where they were trying to protect the environment from exploiters, and they were rated as terrorists, but not the like huge corporations who were exploiting the environment, messing it up, which are causing some of the problems that we have today. So I would say yeah, and the government for sure.
Just an interesting note to add, according to the Pew Research Institute, this is a topic that Democrats and Republicans tend to differ greatly on when it comes to whether this should be a top priority of the current administration. Democrats tend to lean that, yes, it should be a top priority, whereas Republicans tend to lean that other topics are more important. So this is one of the things that, that each political party really differs on this in the environment. So just an interesting tidbit that we found as we were doing research for this presentation.
Okay. Are there any other questions or points of discussion?
I think one point that's not on the list that I would add as a question is, does climate change as it's occurring equally affect everyone in this country? It seems to me it's like the COVID virus. Those who are more disadvantaged will be more stressed by limited resources. As water becomes potable water, drinking water becomes less and less. It's going to become a commodity that people buy and sell at a higher and higher price. In certain countries in Asia right now, the air, you have to literally buy oxygen to wear when you go to work. So that's becoming a limited commodity. We don't pay for air in this country right now, but in looking at how we're going to deal with it, shouldn't we also look at what people can do to limit the negative effects that are going to happen, and what can we do to ensure that people who are less financially well off aren't going to suffer the major consequences of it? Especially people living near the coast. Like East West Coast.
Look at the wildfires, perfect example.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I have to add to Warren's point as well, that is a major part of social justice, right? Climate justice. You brought up a point about what about those who may not have access to resources? There was a coalition task force under the previous administration that really did address this, but it does raise the question, what about those who may not have those resources available, and how can we create spaces of equity and justice for them as well?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I would also like to just make the comment that I kind of agree with Thomas, that there are certain things that have happened through climate change that no matter what we do, cannot be reversed. However, I don't think that's a good excuse for us to say that we shouldn't examine climate control and see what we can do to prevent any further damage to our environment.
I just want to go back to what you were saying, just to reply. I agree with you on that last point you made, and that we should be looking towards the future and what we're doing right now to at least dampen or lessen the effects of what climate change will do for future generations. And I agree with you. I was just saying more of what we've done already. We've already set the bar up so high, like for the effects in 50, 60 years from now. And I don't think we'll be able to get back to a time of like where we are now, and with the air quality of how good it is. I mean, in some areas, other areas, it's a lot. It's not,
Thomas, I totally agree with what you said. All I was trying to say is that, and you certainly, it sounds like you have a lot more scientific knowledge than I do about glaciers and the CO2 release and whatever. However, I'm just saying that we just can't let that be used as an excuse why we shouldn't address what we can do from here on in to prevent any further damage to our to our climate. And when you talk about 50 or 60 years, you know, we're talking about people your age, and then children you have and grandchildren you may have. We need to think about not just ourselves, but future generations.
Well said.
Thank you. That was a great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. We're going to move on to foreign affairs now, and I'm going to facilitate this one with Jacob Tucker. Okay, if we look at our world military spending, it's really interesting. We start out by seeing that the United States accounts for more than 1/3 of our world military spending. That's when you think about it, and this was a study done over 188 countries. And if you look at, we spend twice as much as China and Russia together. So that's a really interesting footnote. And I thought it was important that we set this discussion by seeing what are we talking about when we talk about military spending, and where do we stand in light from the United States to the world. Another big issue that's become very, I don't want to say controversial, but diplomacy versus military strength. What should our strategies be? And if you look at this, it's very defined in terms of the two political parties. The Democrats overwhelmingly feel that the support for diplomacy over military strength. Over the past 25 years, if you look, Republicans have stated about a 50% belief in that. And yet from 2016 till 2019, they've gone a 7% increase towards thinking we need to have more of a diplomatic stance. The Democrats over the past 25 years have had it has been between 75 to 90% spread, believing that the diplomacy really is what has to be at the top of everything we do on the world front. Our ratings of the United States, I'd like everybody to really look at this chart because it's rather depressing. When we look at how we are, our favorability ratings, it's declined a minimum of 35% since the year 2000. And when we look at where the greatest declines come from, it's from the United Kingdom, Germany, Japan, and Canada. Now, when we talk about our allies, you know, Canada especially, look at the chart. I hope you can see it, because it has been a drastic decline from the year 2000. If we look at the worldview of the United States since President Trump has been in office, we look at the confidence. And I have this slide on here because it's been very important. The Pew Research Center has done a lot of work on this because they really feel it's going to shape our foreign affairs for many, many years to come. In 2016, the United States, their favorable view was 64%. In 2019, it was at 53%. And in 2016, the confidence in President Obama was 74%. And in 2019, the confidence in President Trump was at 31%. So I think that this is an important slide to look at, and it's not going to matter whether it's President Trump or Vice President Biden. It's an image that really has to be looked at, and it has to be increased for us to be a viable world leader. Mm-hmm. I'm going to now turn it over to Jacob.
With the foreign affairs positions of the U.S. candidates, President Donald Trump believes that the tariffs that he imposed should be maintained, while Vice President Biden believes that they should be unstated. Should the U.S. re-enter a nuclear deal with Iran? President Donald Trump says no, because he was the one that took us out of the Iran deal. And then Vice President Joe Biden, who is a part of the administration that negotiated that deal, says we should re-enter that negotiation with Iran again. Does the U.S. need to increase the military budget to improve national security? President Donald Trump says yes, we should. Vice President Joe Biden says no. Should the U.S. withdraw troops from the Middle East? Both candidates have a favorable opinion on this position, with both agreeing that we should withdraw troops from the Middle East. Should the U.S. have withdrawn troops in northern Syria in October of 2019? President Donald Trump, who was in charge at the time and made the decision, agrees with that determination. Vice President Joe Biden says we shouldn't have withdrawn our troops from Syria. Should the U.S. have withdrawn from the Open Skies Treaty? President Donald Trump says yes. Vice President Biden says no. So the points to consider as we embark on this discussion, has the constant turnover in President Trump's foreign affairs administration affected national security? Does high defense spending guarantee national security? Does embracing foreign dictators from Russia, North Korea, Ukraine, and Saudi Arabia tarnish the United States' image on the world stage? Has the United States alienated ourselves from our allied countries? Is the United States looked upon as a world leader to promote peace globally? I'll open the floor for discussion now. If anyone has any thoughts they'd like to share.
Does anyone have any questions, comments?
I guess for the second question, does high defense spending guarantee national security? Just something that I find interesting is that we have military bases all around the world, and it kind of makes me wonder how that is helping our national security. And if we're the only country that's doing this, you know, why is it necessary? I know that our military budget is just astronomical. If you go to the UN down in New York City, they have this nice graph, this huge bubble that shows you military spending versus this tiny little dot for peacekeeping. And they have a running total of how many billions of dollars have been spent every day. So I would like to believe that we do not need such high defense spending, but I'm not an expert. So if anyone has any more about that, that'd be great.
I would counter that by saying that the reason we have those military bases in every nation almost, or at least in key hotspots around the world, is so we're able to maintain our status as a global leader, and we're able to effectively respond and take the lead and the response to various global security concerns. At least that was the intention, I'd imagine, when they were set up, just to maintain stability and control.
Well, it's like healthcare in a way. Does spending more money on healthcare automatically guarantee greater health for people? Other countries are able to provide healthcare cheaper and more effectively. Does defense spending mean national security? If a lot of that money was put into infrastructure and reducing global climate change and partnering with other countries in the world to do that, that might actually increase our national security. That's my opinion anyway. For worth 2 cents at least, maybe 5 because of inflation.
But it's certainly a big pie they can take it out of, though, certainly.
Yeah, very big pie.
What's really interesting too is if you look at like North Korea and you look at Iran, both with nuclear arms, their defense budgets are nowhere near anywhere like ours, or they're not even in the top 5 or 10.
Yet they keep on becoming stronger militarily, so it's
Right.
not just spending money. On the other hand, if I owned an international global corporation involved in producing arms and materials that go into making tanks, jets, and whatever, I would, I could see what a company might say, well, it's our national security. No, it's our corporate interest to get more money. So I think we're confusing national security with whose interests are we benefiting. I don't feel any safer than I did I feel less safe security-wise in this country than I did 4 years ago. And it depends on who the leader is too of this country. When amazing we haven't gotten into a world war yet. That's reinforced my belief in God. Only a miracle has kept us out of the wars. And I don't think spending more money on security is the answer. Maybe national security should be considered, including the welfare of people in this country as well. Healthcare, infrastructure, not reversing, but maybe just mediating the effects of global climate change. Those should be part of national security too.
I think we've learned with COVID. Just look at the the PPE with the equipment. It's under the Defense Cares Act. I don't think people would have ever thought that that's where it comes from. And think about the switch, the minute you could put that act into play, what can be created from the health side, like you say, Warren. So there's a huge interplay with the defense spending that goes on. Are there any other questions, discussion, anything anyone would like to bring up on this?
I'll say something. Well, I'm taking my first like international relations class, so like this is still like kind of new to me, but I think that it's like irresponsible for us to spend so much money on military when we have so many issues going on in our own country that could be fixed if we put some of that money towards other things. And also, like, for me, it's like, who cares about looking like the global leader when you have all these issues going on? Like, according to this book I'm reading, it's called like Homo Deus. It's like very unlikely that we're ever gonna have like another world war again. So why would you spend so much money on military when so many people in your country are like struggling? That's just how I look at it.
Also reduces the probability of having civil war in this country if we have more equitable distribution of needed services to all people in this country. It's not, the next war may not be fought with a foreign power, may be fought right in this country because of disparities.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to thank Caroline. I was trying to just pull that up to see if I could get the URL and it didn't work. But thank you for sharing that. I'd like everybody to look at the chat. She's got a website she'd like us to look at. There's community translations as far as I know, so they may not be perfect, but it's world newspapers, and it's all about how the US is viewed by the rest of the world. So I would hope everybody, if you can copy that down, it's https // watchingamerica.com/W/A/. Thank you for sharing that, Caroline.
I would just like to add before we move on, if that would be all right, that military spending, I believe in my own opinion, that it's increased is not only for spending money, but also like guns around the world are expensive and there's huge money to be made. And as it comes back to, we live in this capitalistic country, there's always money to be made everywhere. That for, like, speaking of like when we went to war for World War II, that's just an example. There was increased spending all around. The economy did better. Now times have changed, of course, and we're moving more into like a peaceful era, hopefully, even though we're spending only like a little bit. I think that like the spending should definitely be decreased, but will it happen now in the next 10 years? Probably not, because you can't just leap into something and be like, okay, now this is the new set bill, this is how much we're only going to be giving around. But I think if a lot of people were to speak out to congressmen and then like elect officials with their own ideals, then over time it could then progress into an era where military spending isn't as high as it is now.
Thank you, Thomas. If there's no other questions or discussion, then we'll move to our last topic of the evening, and that's criminal justice reform. Kara?
Thank you. I will be co-facilitating with Mia Robinson. So just some, what are the statistics? The portion of U.S. residents age 12 or older who were victims of violent crime excluding simple assault decreased by 12% from 2018 to 2019. And the rate of violent victimization in urban areas based on new classifications of urban, suburban, and rural areas declined from 20% from 2018 to 2019. From 2018 to 2019, again, 29% fewer Black persons and 22% fewer white persons were victims of serious crime, generally felonies, so assault, murder in first degree and second degree. were the top that came under this category. According to crime victims surveyed in 2019, the percentage of violent victimizations reported to police was lower for white victims at 37% than for Black at 49% and or Hispanic victims at 49% as well. Okay. So the US prison system. Changes in law and policy, not changes in crime rates, explain the most of this increase here. The results are overcrowding in prisons and fiscal burdens on the state. Despite increasing evidence that large-scale incarceration is not an effective means of achieving public safety. Since the official beginning of the war on drugs in the 1800s, the number of people incarcerated for drug offenses in the United States skyrocketed from 40,900 in 1980 to 452,964 in 2017. So part of the war on drugs, one of the statutes that came out of that, for a little bit of context, was the Rockefeller drug laws that were very pertinent in New York City, which targeted Black and brown communities. Those laws have since been remanded. I mean, so those laws have since been abolished in 2009 respectively. So this is where that increase in number comes in, just for context. Today, there are more people behind bars for a drug offense than the number of people who were in prison or in jail for any crime in 1980. The number of people sentenced for prison, property, and violent crimes has also increased, even during periods when crime rates have declined. Okay, so just for context here to see the United States of the United States prison industrial complex, international rates of incarceration per 100,000. As you can see here, out of all the developed nations they have surveyed, this is from the Sentencing Project, a nonprofit that evaluates and looks at data and statistics in terms of the criminal justice system in the United States and worldwide. The United States is leading at the highest number of rates of incarceration. So we're talking about mass incarceration here, under El Salvador and Rwanda, respectively.
Wow.
So US, these are just some statistics, just the US state and federal prison population from 1925 to 2018. And we can see this is in the millions here. So 1.4 million, just think about that for a second. And what does this look like for the population? So look at the steady increase for pretty much almost 100 years ago. Really astounding. And this is just another chart. The number of people serving life sentences from 1984 to 2016 has also drastically increased. So from 34,000 to 162,372 individuals. Okay. So what are the racial implications of mass incarceration as we look at the prison industrial complex? So sentencing policies, implicit bias, and socioeconomic inequality or inequity contribute to racial disparities at every level in the criminal justice system. So today, people of color make up 37% of the US population. However, they make up the majority as 67% of the prison population. Overall, African Americans and or Black individuals are more than likely than whites to be arrested. Once arrested, they are more likely to be convicted, and once convicted, they are more likely to face stiff sentences. And for context, here is some evidence of this, and we can talk about the real Jim Crow. Here, Black men comprised about 13% of the general population, but 35% of those were incarcerated. Black women comprise 44% of the incarcerated women, but only make up 13% of the US female demographic. So just some other charts and data here. And if you were on the call last week, we talked about racial justice and racial injustice and what that looks like, right? And we can see this evidently here by these two charts, which are from the Prison Policy Initiative, another nonprofit that identifies statistics in terms of the criminal justice system. So the U.S. incarceration rates by race and ethnicity, again, Black individuals make up the highest number as per 100,000 people each in each racial category. And racial disparities persist in jail and prison incarceration. So you can see this at both the local levels and both the state levels at local jails and federal prisons, again, in the 100,000s of here. So there has been reform over the years to try to combat mass incarceration in the United States. So for more than a decade, the political climate of criminal justice reform has been evolving towards evidence-based common sense approaches to public safety. And we can hear that in our current state today. This can be seen in a variety of legislative, judicial, and policy changes that have successfully decreased incarceration without adverse impacts on public safety. So that is part of the conversation now when people are mentioning defund the police and what that looks like. How do we allocate resources and create opportunities for public safety? At the state level, so California and New York, and it's important to note here that both California and New York and their respective cities have had some of the highest rates of Black and brown peoples and people from all other races in jails and in the prison system serving life sentences. So California voters ballot measure Proposition 47 in 2014, which reclassifies certain low-level property and drug crimes from felonies to misdemeanors and will reinvest some of the fiscal savings into prevention programs. It is important to note too here that Senator Kamala Harris was very provincial in this Proposition 47. New York policymakers reformed the Rockefeller drug laws in 2009, as I mentioned before, which imposed harsh mandatory minimum sentences for low-level drug offenses. So for example, thank you, Flor. So for example, if someone is caught with a small amount of marijuana, not having to serve a 5-year or more life sentence. And I'm just going to touch on one of the points at the federal level. In Congress, under the Obama administration, passed the Fair Sentencing Act in 2010, which reduced the disparity in sentences between crack and powder cocaine offenses. So criminal justice positions, Nia Robinson will take that.
Oh, hi. Well, I just want to add before I start this one, some of the things that Joe Biden wants to do, which involves the drug stuff that she talked about, was he wants to end all incarceration for drug use alone and instead divert individuals to drug and court treatment instead. And he wants to decriminalize the use of weed and expunge all prior weed convictions. But he will support the legalization of medical marijuana, but not the position of like recreational. Okay, so for the issues on the thing, for the first one, should federal or state governments implement ban the box legislation, which prevents employers from asking about a job applicant's criminal history? Donald Trump and Joe Biden say yes. Should the U.S. end the cash bail system? Donald Trump says no, and Joe Biden says yes. Should the death penalty be allowed? Donald Trump says yes, while Joe Biden says no. Should the use of private prisons continue? Donald Trump says yes, and Joe Biden says no. Here are some points to consider. What are ways in which we can address mass incarceration? What are your thoughts about the school to prison pipeline? What are the implications of mass incarceration on the economy, families, and society? How can the U.S. assist in ensuring those once incarcerated have access to opportunities in order to decrease recidivism rates? What should be some of the considerations in criminal justice reform?
Any questions? Any ideas or thoughts?
Dumb question, but is a private like prison just used for the wealthy, so when they get sentenced they have somewhere nicer to go? I'm not sure.
No, I don't think that's a dumb question at all. I think it's a good one. So the way that privatized prisons work, they are a large investment in the United States. As a matter of fact, the United States, I'm not sure of the country. I believe it is Uganda, and I have to double check that, is where you see the highest rates of privatizations of prisons. I'm not sure if there's a link between the socioeconomics in this sense of the wealthy, but there are different facilities that house different types of individuals for different reasons. So that is a good question and one to investigate. I challenge you to do so.
I know that private prisons are used as a alternative to public prisons because they're much cheaper.
Yeah.
And that rather than being a place where you'd put the more affluent, it's a place where you would put those who have the least power and least ability to protest being treated uncivilly, because the private system is in business to make money. They're not in business to engage in reform. They're just in business to make money. That's what makes them so much more efficient, because they're not caring for people. They're just simply warehousing people.
Yeah. Sorry. No, Warren hit the nail on the head. That's the controversy with privatized prisons, is that, like Warren said, they make money off of having inmates. So oftentimes they may not do the necessary work, or the work that people would hope they would do to reduce the recidivism rates and make sure that inmates leave and are able to return to society as normal. So that's why they are awfully often controversial. They make money off of inmates, basically.
And I'm glad that thank you, Brittany, for touching on that. I'm just going to follow up with that point too, is you see also a lot of corporations involved in private prison labor as well. So a lot of big name corporations, which I will not name, have been found to use prison labor at very low cost to make products such as lingerie or sneakers or things to that effect, even some household products. So it's really, really interesting. And also an important note to put here, privatized prisons also don't have to adhere to certain human rights laws that are just guaranteed at the federal and state level. So a perfect example of this was an incident in Arizona with a private prison where inmates were found being very much so harmed, and it didn't come out until someone who came to visit saw bruises on the person that she was coming to visit and see. And there was a lot of human rights violations as well. So as Brittany had mentioned on the economic standpoint, but also on the humanitarian standpoint as well, there's a lot of issues around privatized prison.
Thank you, Kara. Are there any other questions, discussions, anything anyone would like to add?
I just will encourage, even talking about this further, and if anyone's interested in this topic, there is a book, a very good book by Michelle Alexander, if you all have read it. It's called The New Jim Crow: Mass Incarceration in the United States. It's a very good read if anyone is interested in knowing more about the prison industrial complex and how it impacts our society.
Well, a lot of the detainees at the southern border of this country are being literally warehoused in prison settings. They aren't broken any real laws, but they're being warehoused and treated by private prison systems. That's a new lucrative line of making money that a lot of these corporations involved in. They're also involved in construction too, because you know, they have to have the prison site in order to do it. And I suspect there's a lot of corruption, criminal activity going on within the private criminal and incarceration system.
Thank you.
What was the title? The New Grim Crow.
I will definitely put it in the comments for you. It's called The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Another good book is Just Mercy, which talks about a lawyer who went down, I forgot what state it was, And there was no just mercy in the way people were arrested and treated and incarcerated. It was based upon discriminatory practices. And, you know, even not saying that the public prisons are much better, but at least there's some requirements in terms of civil rights for people, which don't exist in the private warehouse system we have now.
Carolyn, hi Carolyn, I saw your question, and I do did want to make sure that I got to it because it's a good one. So what the school to prison pipeline refers to, it refers to the racial inequities that people of color tend to face matriculating through education and leading all the way up until incarceration. So they did a study. Dr. Michelle Alexander is a sociologist. She studies criminal justice and racial disparities in the United States. And one of the things that they identified was that Black and brown males in particular were seeing higher instances and rates of detention, school disciplinary action. They tend to face harsher actions compared to their white counterparts. And they studied these young men, I believe they were between the ages of 5 and 7 at the time, all the way to from their formative years into the adulthood. They found that based on their school record in terms of disciplinary actions and hearings, it led them down to a path that led them to being incarcerated. So Michelle Alexander's book talks about this. If you've ever on Netflix, they have a documentary, I think it may be on there, called The 13th, which references the 13th Amendment. So it's a really good documentary. If you have a moment, take a look at it. That really details the school to prison pipeline.
How about a pipeline? It's a school to productive employment for students instead.
Okay.
Think how much better the world would be if we had a system like that that gave all students an opportunity to become productive members of the community at all levels of, not depending upon where they started out, but give them an opportunity to achieve their true productivity.
Right. This has been a really good discussion, but for the sake of time, I'm going to keep us on task so that we can all look forward to watching the debate in an hour. I hope that you all stay with us. We've got 2 more sessions next week. We will actually continue with the criminal justice, speaking on Wednesday night with our leaders sharing vision, values, and views. We will be having criminal justice leaders share with us different questions, answers, discussion. That'll be on Wednesday, October 28th from 7 to 8 p.m. And we'll close out our series from the Levesque Institute next Thursday. We're really excited about this one. Dr. Carrie Teresa, Associate Professor in the Communication Studies Department and Chair of the department, will be presenting politics in the media. And we really hope that you all join in. Please spread the word, and we look forward to that. And for this evening, I would really like to give a special thanks to all of our student facilitators for joining us. You did a great job. Proud of our NU people, as always. Special thanks to Kara, and a special thanks to Brittany DePietro. Brittany, just so everybody knows, she's the behind the scenes. She does all of this, puts it together. She does a lot of work with this series, and I just wanted to give her a special thanks. It's greatly appreciated because we in the Levesque Institute feel this is really important. It's our civic duty to bring to the community, to bring factual information, and hopefully where you walk away remembering it's your voice and your vote matters. So have a good evening, and let's hope that we have a very good debate. And I'd like to encourage all of you to please look, when we talk about how important civility is in terms of civic engagement, there is it's a 1-minute commercial, 2 gubernatorial candidates from the state of Utah. And it's fantastic. It's exactly what we can only hope for in our public life today from public officials and those running for a public office. Yeah. So please tune in on it. It's also on our website, but take a look and you'll see that it really gives you encouragement to know that civility can happen. So have a good night and hope to see you all next week.
Amen.
Thank you.